My motivation for getting up in the morning? I think it's just that I know now there are always birds that need help. Although people may have a general understanding of the problem, once you start patrolling and experiencing bird-building collisions firsthand, it's harder to ignore.
Finding casualties of building collisions has brought me to tears on many, many occasions. And the way that I look at buildings now has completely changed.
One Saturday patrol, I picked up 22 golden-crowned kinglets that had collided with the building. I don't think that helpless feeling will ever leave me. It's chilling to realize that a whole flock of beautiful songbirds perished because we've made their fly path a deadly obstacle course.
One day, coming up the steps to the front doors of a building, are 4 dead birds in a row, collided into the windows, maybe together at the same time. I'm stunned. It's a terrible sight. On seeing the layout, I hope the public is shocked and feel both sad and angry that these birds could be in their backyards bringing joy.
On one busy morning, I picked up 17 birds, and only 3 were alive. When I got home and put a tag on each bird, I felt sad that each death that I held in my hands was preventable. They did not need to die this way. So many buildings in the city are aware of the problem, but not doing anything. It is a problem we can fix. If we collect dead birds and document them, it becomes data that we can prove that bird collisions are still happening. I wonder how many deaths are enough for people to start caring and act. I do not know the answer, but I keep going out because I believe our work will make a difference.
Anin, bonjour, bonjour, hello. Soren brothers, Indishnikas, Tagalundo and Donjaba, Jaganashi Ninitindao. My name is Soren Brothers. I am from Toronto and I'm a white man. Good evening and welcome to the ROM. I'm the Alan and Helene Schiff Curator of Climate Change at the museum, and I'm delighted that you can join us for today's program. I wanted to begin by acknowledging that ROM sits on the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation since time immemorial to today. This afternoon's program is in support of the special exhibition Wildlife Photographer of the Year 2024, on now at ROM until May 4th. Wildlife Photographer of the Year is developed and produced by the Natural History Museum in London, England, and is generally supported by the Royal Exhibition Circle. When worlds collide, photography in service to nature. When I think about collision, and obviously in the shadow of this video as well, I think about 2 bodies coming together and two objects, 2 worlds, obviously in this case. And I think about the relationships between them, and that was actually one of the main focal points of and main focal themes of this year's Wildlife Photographer of the Year exhibition. When we first saw the photographs coming up from the Natural History Museum in London, we could see that there was a lot of relationships also between species. There were familial relationships, there were conflict relationships, fighting, but there was also relationships between humans and the natural world, and obviously thinking about ourselves as part of it is important in respecting that relationship and understanding it and responding to it. As a scientist who's worked most of my career in aquatic environments, and looking at the human interactions with waters especially, but also with nature more broadly, it's been really important to me to try and get people to understand how much nature and appreciate how much nature is in the cities and in our urban areas that we're constantly interacting with. And, you know, in Toronto, you don't have to look any further to the sidewalks in some of these cases, or obviously if you go down to the Don Valley, you can see endangered turtles, salamanders. There's so much here that we tend to forget, and this is true for cities around the world. And I think that this is where focusing on the relationships and thinking about how we mature as a city, and what that means in terms of not responding just to the social crises that we have on our hands, but also the biodiversity crises and also the climate crisis, is where it's really important to have conversations such as this one. And FLAP, the Fatal Light Awareness Program, has been a really huge role in that in Toronto, especially with the relationship between birds and ourselves in the city. And so I'm really excited that this program is here. And I'm really proud to mention that ROM has had a long-standing relationship with FLAP as well, and I believe that's going to be coming up in the conversation as well. So with that, before I go forward and introduce the guests, I just wanted to mention a couple housekeeping notes. Please make sure that your phones are on silent for the duration of the program. And there will also be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the conversation. So we ask that you hold your questions until the end. And when called upon, please wait until we bring a microphone to you. So this afternoon, I would like to welcome 3 special guests whose work has been truly impactful in this area. Patricia Homonylo is a conservation photojournalist and filmmaker based in Toronto. Her work focuses on animal and wildlife rescue and she wants her work to shine a light on animals caught in the crosshairs of human interference. Along with being awarded in Wildlife Photographer of the Year 2024, Patricia has been most recently awarded the prestigious title Bird Photographer of the Year. Welcome, Patricia. Michael Mesure is the Executive Director of Fatal Light Awareness Program, or FLAP Canada, a registered Canadian charity. Michael tirelessly advocates for bird protection at various levels of government, as well as consults with city planners across North America on developing bird-friendly guidelines and standards. Welcome, Michael. And leading today's conversation, I would like to welcome my colleague, Mark Peck. For 41 years, Mark was the collections specialist in ornithology at ROM until his retirement in 2024. Much of his time was involved in ornithological research, fieldwork, and collections management, but he was also involved with museum programming, exhibitions, and gallery development. In addition, he has been an author and photographer to numerous websites, popular articles, scientific papers, and books. Mark is also the Vice President of the Ontario Field Ornithologists and was awarded the Distinguished Ornithologist of the Year Award by them in 2024. Welcome, Mark. And I hope you'll join me in enjoying the conversation.
So first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. It's a wonderful turnout. And for me, especially, I have the honor to be sitting with 2 incredible storytellers. And they've gone about their work in different ways, but they've come together to tell a really powerful story that I think, obviously you're here, is very valuable to us and to birds in general. So let me start by just asking, let's get some background. So Patricia, what inspired you to pursue wildlife photojournalism? Sorry.
No, that's great. It actually was, there was a point that really changed everything for me. And that was a visit I had to a place called Hope for Wildlife. Some of you may know it, about 7 or 8 years ago, where I met Hope. And I wanted to help, but I wasn't a vet. I wasn't a scientist, and I wanted to know what I could do. We got along very well. So I took photos for her. And the one you're seeing here is Frankie the fox. Frankie is an educational animal. And this image, I'm happy to say, actually he literally became the poster boy for Hope, and he's over posters, and it was nice to see my photographs take that and be able to help. I also went on to work with other wildlife rescues and created numerous calendars. Happy to say, Hope for Wildlife, we raised over $90,000 in calendar sales in the 2 years, so it was a way to help. But while I was seeing Frankie, I was also seeing this. And this is a little fox that was named Ladybug. They always give names to all the animals. And this was where everything changed for me. I knew that I didn't want to just take portraits. I should say just, I know there's value in taking portraits, but it was the story that mattered to me. And I love this photo because it not only shows Ladybug, who, Ladybug was found under someone's porch. The mother had been killed. The siblings had already starved to death, and they brought in this fox trying to save it. But I was really interested and loved all the hands behind Ladybug and everybody that was trying to help. So I wanted to change my stories, my images into stories, that it was something bigger than a portrait for me. And the next image you see here is a raccoon that came in, and you can see what I'm showing you here is the bottle caps that got stuck when it was an infant. And it grew into it until it was found and brought into Hope for Wildlife. Again, I love this idea that I'm telling the whole story, that you can see the surgery, you can see the hands, you can see everything it takes to bring an animal back. This one in particular, I really hope that people will take to heart that you can save a life, and that cutting those bottle rings makes a difference. We see it all the time. So I really want to encourage people to do that and to see what they can do in my conservation photography, that it's at home, that we can do things. We don't have to wait for everybody else.
Thanks. Okay, little bit of more information. What kind of equipment are you using to do your photography and your photojournalism?
So I know Mark was asking me earlier, what do I think is essential equipment? So I will say I've, over the years, have quite a kit that I take out with me. I recommend if you go into this that you start doing some push-ups and do some cardio because I do go out there alone, and I often tell people I take pictures and I carry stuff. So there is that. I would say the thing that's become essential for me are twofold. One is I do have a camera second body, which could be your smartphone, but it's really handy because when you're sitting there with a long lens and then all of a sudden the story, that wide lens. So I carry the wide lens on my side at all times. I would also say and emphasize to people who are doing this, we think about our camera equipment, but we don't think about our safety equipment. When you're going out, and I often do it alone, don't do it alone. I have fallen, I have broken things and been out there by myself, so I learned the hard way. And when I fell, my phone went flying, so I couldn't find it because it was in the bush. So do keep in your car a basic first aid kit. I carry a headlamp. I would say these are essential. You want a whistle, something to make noise, should you be stuck. So those are ticks. Also ticks, it's Ontario. That's always in my glove compartment.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's go over to Michael. Michael, I've heard this story before, but it's such a powerful story, and I'm sure some of you have heard it before, but can you tell me how FLAP originated in the first place?
Sure. All right. Well, I'll give you caution here. Both Patricia and myself, we wear our heart on our sleeve. Stories.
You're good. I'm here with you.
Give me a second.
That film still makes me cry.
Okay. To give some context, I found out about the issue of bird collisions back in 1989. And I don't know, I'll assume that most of us, at some point in our life, we're faced with something, and we have to make a choice. And it all depends on if you're going to listen. So, there was one particular morning, it was back in 1990. Flap hadn't been formed yet, and I had encountered what was still one of the busiest mornings. Hundreds of birds everywhere, lying on the streets of Toronto. And at that point, there was no real organized method to picking up these birds. So there were paper bags, there were cardboard boxes I had in my car. I had run out very quickly, and I need a Kleenex, excuse me. And so I started foraging through garbage to get donut bags from coffee shops. Anything I could find to house the live birds I found. And then day broke, and if you ever have the experience of seeing this kind of thing yourself, as soon as the day breaks, scavengers move in, they start scavenging birds very quickly. They disappear before people even know what's happening in the city. So anyway, I had done the best I could that morning. I'm driving out of the city, and it happens quite often. You have all these paper bags, containers in your car, and some tend to escape. And this one particular common yellowthroat escaped. And it was flying around inside my vehicle, and they were trying to find a way out of this invisible barrier that's keeping them contained inside your vehicle. And this one flew, and it landed on my rearview mirror. And it didn't only land on my rearview mirror, it started to sing inside my car. And if you've ever heard a common yellowthroat sing inside a car, any bird, quite frankly, you are blown away about how such a small creature can amplify such a powerful, beautiful voice. So it's singing away. It probably lasted all of about 10, 15 seconds. It felt like infinity. It stopped singing, fluffed its feathers out, and dropped dead in my lap. So, not the first time I had seen death at that point, but it took that moment to make me realize that something had to be done. You know, there was no voice for these birds. So, back to tears again, sorry. I realized that I had to get organized. And the people that were helping their time with me at the time, we just decided that we would create an organization. And by 1993, that's how FLAP was born. We created the organization, and we've been going ever since. Sorry for all the tears. There you go.
Don't apologize. It's a really remarkable story that you've been able to do. And I know how emotional this one is for you, but at the same time, it gives everyone, I hope, some context on what Michael and the volunteers of FLAP have been able to accomplish in the last 30 years, and it's really remarkable. So let me ask you to tell us a little bit more about FLAP.
Thank you.
And some of the programs that FLAP started and the success that FLAP has had.
Okay, thank you. I can talk about stuff that won't make me cry. So, again, a little bit of context. I think there's this mind's eye perspective that FLAP is a very big organization. We are two full-time staff, and hopefully soon to be one additional third full-time staff person who's with us today, Caitlin Bro, a volunteer coordinator. And we work out of a very small space. I think the next image might show that. It's in Bell Trinity Church, right next to the Eaton Center. We do probably too much work based on our small volume of staff. We have a network of volunteers. I think we rotate around between 60 to 80 volunteers, mainly those that are doing bird rescue in different parts across the GTA. And we have lots of programs. We have our Global Bird Rescue Program, which is a week-long event in the fall. This year it's the last week of September. And, pardon me, we have a classroom and public education program called Birds in Your Hood. We have our Global Bird Collision Mapper. I will ask you, please, if you get a chance, look for the Global Bird Collision Mapper. It's a GIS mapping database, allows people from all over the world to enter a bird-building collision into this database.
You will be amazed at the number of entries that are popping up on this map. And the beauty of this map, it's called community science. Research bodies, government agencies are now relying heavily on community science. And the app, the Global Bird Collision Mapper, is playing a huge role in this. If you ever find a bird-building collision anywhere in your life, anywhere you go, please enter it into this mapper, because this is being used for research all over the world now. It's been used in lawsuits now. It's helping convince cities to introduce guidelines and standards in their communities. So every little data that goes, every piece of data that goes into this is invaluable. Please do look this up, and on a day-to-day basis, you can download it onto your phone and keep it with you at all times, okay? If you look hard enough, you'll be amazed how many birds you end up finding. I'll leave it at that. I could go on forever about that. It kind of gives you an idea of the volume of work that we're doing. Just to close, it was mentioned in my introduction that the bulk of our work now is working with government agencies and industry professionals, trying to come up with solutions that everyone's happy with. It isn't easy. It's an ongoing battle. But my gosh, if we look at the time that's gone by, what we've been able to achieve, I never, ever thought in my lifetime I'd see the volume of progress taking place as a result of our efforts. So we're quite proud of that. And I'll leave it at that.
Can I ask you how many volunteers you have? I know you have 2 full-time staff, which
That's
doesn't
right.
sound like a lot.
Well, Caitlin will probably be able to recite this better, but I've always been used to seeing the numbers float in around 60 to 80 volunteers. Now, not all of those volunteers are actively out every day doing bird rescue or involved. They come and go. They help out where they can in a given year, but some are out every single day sometimes during the migration seasons doing bird rescue. And I will add, there is no way that FLAP could ever exist or gotten to the point it's been able to get to without the volunteers. And people don't understand how important, how valuable a volunteer is to the success of a grassroots organization, trying to be heard. Just an example, the 2 lawsuits I mentioned, I didn't quite go into detail on, all the data, precedent-setting lawsuits, one in 2010, the other in 2013, first lawsuits of their kind, those lawsuits could never have taken place without the data, and without the data would never have been there if there weren't the volunteers in the street looking for these birds. So can't thank the volunteers enough, quite frankly, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Patricia, how long have you been volunteering at FLAP?
I've been volunteering, I think it's about 5 years now, and I started when I actually saw at the ROM one of the layouts, and I wanted to walk a mile in their shoes and see what they see and hear what they hear. And the image behind me that I chose was sort of Mark, Mike talking about wearing our heart on our sleeves, is once you find your first bird, I was forever changed. And I had to come back. So what started sort of as this photography dropping in became something I couldn't get myself to leave. There's no animal that ends up in any of these situations without human interference. And I wanted to talk about that. And this image is about not just about the bird, but it's about the people passing by. And that is also very difficult for me, that people walk on by. And talking about grassroots, it's like, you can do something. Don't wait for the government. You can go home and fix your windows and do something about it. And that was very important to me.
Thanks. How or why do you think this image here, which is in Wildlife Photography of the Year, was so successful?
It's interesting to me that it became so successful, and I'm absolutely thrilled as to how far-reaching it was. So I often, to find that out, I listen to what other people are saying about the image. And I think that for us, we don't realize how shocking this image was to people that don't know anything about bird collisions. And it stopped people around the world to take a look. Artistically, I think the circle is really important and telling. I find that I watch people and they get closer and closer because they don't know what they're looking at. And it draws them into what the issue is. And what they're looking at. I like the circles in particular because for me a metaphor of, I say you're going out there, you're doing work by yourself and it feels very lonely and you're throwing a pebble in the ocean. Then you throw another one and you throw another one. And this one just reverberated around the world. So I really like the circles going out for that reason as well.
And Michael, have these layouts, which you've been doing for a long time,
Yeah.
have they had previous success?
Oh, gosh, yes. Up to the year 2002, we were kind of taking a makeshift approach to doing these layouts. We had no venues to hold them in, but we would lay them on the streets, very disorganized. But funny enough, in 2002, we had picked up one of the greatest volume of birds we had ever picked up. And we couldn't just see these birds. I don't know where it's going to come up in the next series of images, but it went into National Geographic, the 2002 issue of National Geographic. And it was, you'll probably see it in a little bit. It was a square image, and where the birds were laid out in rows. And the photographer came up from Washington with a tripod. And he thought he was going to set his tripod up, tilt it down, and take the shot of the birds. Well, we had to end up moving the birds to inside Nathan Phillips Square to get to a balcony so the photographer could capture all the birds in the photograph. I think it was close to 4,000 birds in that particular image. But the interesting thing about this image, it went out in the magazine, and I'll say about 4 or 5 months later, I get a call from the photographer. And he said, I got a little story to tell you. He said, when that came out in the magazine, we got a complaint from one of our lead clients, Toyota. They were upset by this image. You'll never guess what they were upset about. Why didn't you tell us that image was going to be in your magazine? Because we would have wanted our advertisement on the adjacent page. Because they knew people were going to be flipping back to that image. Constantly flipping back and getting a glance of Toyota every single time. That's how powerful that image was. It went into National Geographic's promotional magazine, where they took highlight images from their history of photography, and that was the one. There I go again. Gets me all excited too.
All right, I'll go back to Patricia here.
So,
have you had success with other images?
Yes, I have had success with other images. You can see on the one side there's a poster for the film, which you saw a trailer for at the beginning, which did very well in the film circuit globally, including winning Best International Documentary and Best Overall Documentary in a very prestigious film festival in London, England, which was really wonderful. The image on the left is, I just want to tell you a little bit about this story, and hopefully you can get something from it too. What you're looking at is a blue-eyed black lemur. It's critically endangered, and I took this image when I was in Madagascar. They're the only the only primate next to humans that have blue eyes. So I was in the zoo in Antananarivo, and suddenly was ushered into a back room. I was uncomfortable, to say the least, but I think I kind of stood out in the crowd, where I was offered for less than half a cent, I could have honey to feed the lemurs. And so suddenly all these lemurs, brown lemurs, came out, and when I turned to the left, this little guy was sitting there looking straight at me with his hand on the broken glass. And it was my first introduction to what tourism can do to animals and to wildlife. Please don't ride an elephant. Please don't pat an owl in a cafe, to know a little bit about what you're doing. So this image, you're talking about the success of it. It's quite interesting because I've taken it kind of everywhere with me. I promised this little guy in my heart that I would show his image for the rest of my life so he did not die in vain. And even just last week, I was co-hosting with the National Museum in London, and he reached well over 100,000 views, over 3,000 shares. So I would consider that a great success and a story I will take with me the rest of my life.
It's an amazing story, and it's a really powerful image.
Mm-hmm. There it is.
Okay, here you go, Mike. We're back. How long, we mentioned the layouts.
That's right.
Many of them were done at the museum here, but you've done them in a number of places.
Yeah.
How did you land on doing these in the first place?
Right. Thank you. It was just a simple concept to just educate the public. And as we've learned from Patricia's image, how powerful an image can be, and the story about the National Geographic image, this is it. Without the imagery, people don't necessarily have a context of what's really going on. And I think that through the years, we did do variations, because whenever I looked at, even though the National Geographic was a really powerful image, it created a frame. You could see that these birds were very distinctly laid out within a specific parameter. And we wanted to kind of find a way to convey the message that the birds go outside the image, like infinity, because flap only picks up not even a fraction of the birds just for the city of Toronto, let alone the rest of the world. So we started to build on this circular pattern, and this was, we tried this here at the ROM. I think this was 2014. I think this may have been the image that went into National Geographic. There was another image that National Geographic did about 10 years later. And we kept building upon that concept because we could see it gave that sense of, like Patricia said, a pebble dropped in water, rippling outwards sort of thing, right? And we tried different variations because we felt people were getting tired of the image, but kept coming back to that circle image, and it got better and better each and every time. And that's what landed on our 30th anniversary image. 3 years, that's amazing. In 2023, we landed on that concept, and Patricia, you took the photograph, and look what happened. It was amazing. So there you go.
And just so everyone is, everyone is clear, these are not the same birds that are being used for each annual layout. These are different birds each year that are brought in and laid out.
Right.
So
that's right. Yeah, I will add, there's a lot of work involved here. And thank you to the generosity of the ROM and Mark, and you're constantly sticking your neck out for us. It's not just birds being thrown together and dragged over to a location and dropped. It takes thousands and thousands of hours of gathering these birds, identifying them, putting them into databases, getting the identification approved and storing them and then transporting them and coming up with the concept and laying them out and the effort to lay those number of birds out, you have about 3 hours to do it because they're frozen. They're not preserved specimens, right? You lay them out quickly, you get the photograph, you store them away again to preserve those specimens for research, other skins for other museums around the world, right? So it's a lot of effort and a noble effort on all the volunteers and everyone involved. So there you go.
yeah, it's not just about collecting the birds. It's trying to find a second life for these birds as well through the research or through educational opportunities after the fact. So yeah, it's been very good. Okay, let's talk about law a little bit.
Sure.
How does the law apply to bird window collisions?
Okay. There's, again, a bit of an evolution there, but I just wanted to start out with this image. This is an artist by the name of Miranda Brandon. She's did this piece for Audubon, National Audubon in the United States, and she wanted to try and depict the moment a bird has an impact with a window, and does a beautiful job at trying to illustrate that point. But the next image is where things have led to. Prior to 2010, there was really nothing on the landscape that offered anybody, but primarily the audiences were really trying to convince to change their buildings, is commercial, government, institutional buildings. There was no product on the landscape that offered a solution that actually worked. The bird of prey decal, just if I can see a hand raised. Anyone familiar with the bird of prey decal? You've seen that around in your lifetime. I would say maybe 50% of you. Doesn't work. And yet that product continues to sell, and the purchaser is led to believe that you slap this decal on your window, the problem's going to be solved. It doesn't work that way. In order for a marker to work effectively, I'm sorry I have to expand in this to kind of explain what's going on here, you have to do full coverage of a window. It has to have a strong contrast. It has to be a certain density. The density of space between each marker can be no greater than 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. And that's how the dotted pattern has landed on the landscape. Get a chance, look out for this around the City of Toronto. You're going to start to see this everywhere, okay? And that's because the City of Toronto introduced mandatory requirements for new builds. Low, mid, and high-rise construction has to meet bird friendly. And so now we have product on the landscape that arrived on the landscape out of the trial in 2010. And with that, we had to try and convince the building code to adopt the standard. We haven't been successful at this. However, out of the second trial in 2013, it became law. Believe it or not, it is now an offense to harm or kill a migratory bird due to a collision with a window, anywhere across Canada, at a listed species level, okay? Locally, we'll say here in the province, any migratory bird in collision with a window is illegal. Now, everyone in this room, in some shape or form, including myself, is going to be at some point in time in violation of that law. The law is not intended for that, all of us. It's intended for those facilities that are killing a large number of birds' lives, that has the means to be able to financially afford to mitigate the threat and aren't adopting it. And this is an example of one of the ways to do it. So the good news is the law is in place. The bad news is the ministry that enforces this law doesn't quite know how to enforce it, because everyone is in some shape or form is breaking this law. How do they enforce a law that everyone's breaking, right? I don't blame them for scratching their head on this one, right? How do we enforce this? So this is why we need it to be put into the building code. Let's get the building code to adopt this so that all buildings across the country have to meet the code, and then start to worry about perhaps charging those buildings that aren't doing something about this. It makes it a lot easier for the government to step in and say, okay, now we can start to enforce this law. So I'll leave it at that.
I just want to say something with that, Michael, though, is I don't want people to think this is just buildings downtown, when over 60% of the birds that are hit are residential. And so the myths are, it's within the first 3 stories that your birds will hit. You've probably heard a thud. People will often tell me, oh, it hit the window and flew away. It probably threw away to die, very sadly. If you think about it, it's like you running your car into a brick wall. Survival's not so good. So don't think it's just downtown or big cities. You can all save a life and you can all help.
Yeah, and just to carry that one step further, this isn't just a Toronto problem. Mm-hmm. This is across the country and across North America and other cities.
It's around the world.
And around the world.
Yeah, that's right.
How bad is it in Toronto?
Okay. There's all kinds of numbers that are floating around about this. And the best way to look at it is that each structure, whether it's a home or an industrial building or a commercial high-rise, will take up to 10 birds' lives a year. That's the average. Doesn't seem like much on an individual basis. You add the number of structures. If you do that math, based on the number of structures in the City of Toronto has the potential to kill 18 million birds a year. Okay? This is no small number of birds, and this is just the City of Toronto. And would this be the time to talk about why Toronto is so bad, do you think?
Sure.
Okay, so listen, Toronto's not alone in this problem. This is happening all over the world, like Patricia said, right? One of the reasons Toronto is so bad, it's like the perfect storm. It has an abundance of modern architecture. It sits up against the shoreline of a large body of water, namely Lake Ontario. It's a very green city. It's full of ravines and tributaries. And when it comes to a large body of water, migratory birds tend to follow the shoreline. They'll follow the shoreline around, so that the City of Toronto kind of becomes like a funnel effect, where you get a high concentration of birds passing through our region. You get a high concentration of birds in an urban environment that has a high volume of glazed surfaces. You're going to have a high number of collisions. So this is why it's bad here. But there's cities like this all over North America. Toronto's not alone. Any coastal city, in fact, Chicago is one of the worst cities. You may have heard this yourself back in, and let me try and think about this. I think it was 2004, Chicago, over close to 1,000 birds perished at McCormick Place over a 6-hour period. Well, not 6-hour period, from breaking dawn. And that went global. That went absolutely global. The number of people that complained at McCormick Place was unbelievable. And since then, McCormick Place has been entirely retrofitted with these dots. And it was over $1 million for them to retrofit that facility. Okay, so there's progress. I'm all over the map there, I get it, but I thought I'd tell that bit of the story. Okay.
All right, you've had success with this photo. Can wildlife photojournalism lead conservation initiatives?
I love that question because I think I feel differently about it now than I did probably a year ago. I will say that this photo has actually reverberated around the world. It was really interesting. So, Bird Photographer of the Year, they told me at 7 o'clock we're going to announce it, and I was sitting at home by myself on my front porch with a little glass of wine, and my feed kept going and going for hours. This photo went around the world, and it has brought, and it's brought so much awareness from the Atlantic to the Smithsonian. I received letters from Korea, from South Africa, from Germany, from Ireland, to me personally about it. So it's raising awareness. It's being used to raise funds now. So I would definitely have to say yes. We need the storytellers. As photographers, you know, we can be horn blowers, we can be whistleblowers, we can be fundraisers. There's all kinds of things we can do. So, as I say here, never underestimate the impact of a single image. I will also say the other half of that is, you know, I have sort of this love-hate with social media. Now I love it. It really has, in this day and age, made a huge difference to the amount of people that were sharing it and where it was going. So that has also been instrumental in sending it around.
So it's more than just Instagram, a pretty picture, and a short.
Well, I think that's and while like many of my projects I've been working on for years, for like 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, that these things take a long time to take. You know, that one image took 5 years. I've been volunteering 5 years with them, but it's not the end of the photo. So it's taking that life on from here. That's been really quite magical and wonderful that this continues, including me sitting here today and being able to talk about these issues that matter so much.
Great, thanks. Michael, where does FLAP go from here?
Well, I sort of already touched on it, but I really do believe that we have to get this to become commonplace. And in my years of doing this, I would have to say that expecting this to evolve on a voluntary level, the change that needs to take place, the birds just simply don't have time. We're losing them far too quickly at far to an astronomical rate to wait for people to step up and take the lead themselves. So this is why we need law. This is why it needs to be part of code. And so right now we're focusing a tremendous amount of our energy and effort toward the building code. Get the building code to adopt this.
I just wanted to say, this is one little thing I like to say when I'm showing my photo. At the time, it was 1.3 billion in North America alone was the count we had. And I don't know nowadays, we hear about, you know, billionaires and they have $500 billion without really understanding that number. And if you were to take a second on the clock and every second you took a count, it would take you 10 and a half days to count to 1 million. It would take you over 33 years to count to 1 billion. And we think we're just changing the first letter, you know, and to really have that concept of what a billion means.
Yeah, and if I can kind of give you another perspective on that, I think it works out to 36 birds a second are dying across North America as a result of collisions with windows. Okay.
But it's moving forward, and we are having some success.
Oh, yes. Well, look, like I said, I never dreamt we'd see law in place for this. Like, this blows my mind. And here's, can I tell a little story about that?
I believe it. Let's go.
It was such a fascinating journey it took. During the trial, they had a professor from the University of Toronto that came in, an engineer, that was able to demonstrate that once daylight reflects off of a window, it's reflected in the form of radiation. Now, under the EPA and the Species at Risk Act, under the EPA, sorry, there's a section dedicated to contaminants where anyone who emits a contaminant that harms or kills a migratory bird and are taking steps to mitigate that concern can be held accountable. Well, under that list of contaminants is radiation. So this is how window collisions came to be a part of the law. It already existed, it's just we had to plant it in there as part of existing language. And so today, as we move forward, we have to try and exercise that law And that's what we're going to try and help the government do by building code and so forth.
Okay, Patricia, you've had great success in both Wildlife Photographer of the Year, Bird Photographer of the Year. Are there more stories you want to tell?
Oh, I have so many stories to tell, and that's been wonderful about this success of this image. It has given me leverage and introduced me to many new people to tell other stories. I'm focusing on local stories that have a global impact, like the birds hitting. Here behind me, you'll see the cormorants. I've been spending lots of time down at Tommy Thompson Park. Cormorants are often maligned and misunderstood, and they are stunning, stunning birds. It's actually a conservation success story. They were almost extinct, and that we've brought them back. And just as a note, because you guys are from Toronto, so that picture on the left, which I think is pretty cool, imagine I'm at Tommy Thompson Park, and across the water is the CIBC Gold Building. The sun was going up behind me and reflected, and then the bird lifted its head. So I had a strong lens, but that was pretty great and pretty special. I'm working on lead poisoning in swans. Again, using that story to talk about it. I mean, we're losing condors, eagles, so many species to lead poisoning. So that's another one that I'm working on. I've got quite a few on the go. I'm looking forward to getting out there.
So, double-crested cormorants are not a sexy species. They are native. There's a lot of differing views on double-crested cormorants. How do you change those views through your work?
That's such a good question, and it makes me think about a photographer I went to see once called Amy Vitale. And Amy Vitale was very famous for bringing pandas to the forefront and saving pandas, because what she said in her talk was, I made them cute. So she made them lovable. So I'm on a quest to make cormorants lovable. I mean, take a look, guys. Like, look at those crests, and their eyes are emerald green, and if they open their mouth, they're turquoise. They're absolutely stunning and special. So that's what I want to show. I also, just as a little plug, so on May 9th, the first Friday at AGO in Walker's Court, I'll be projecting images of cormorant, film images of the cormorants. And even at the AGO, they said to me, oh, we didn't know they were so pretty. So I think that does help the reputation, is that people learn that they're special and they're beautiful. And this only happens in Toronto while they're breeding, that they have that great look. I think there's also something to say that it's a blackbird that's now being culled at an incredible rate, if I can just speak to that for just a moment. I said I wasn't going to talk about this stuff. But we've crossed a real serious threshold with allowing the cull of the cormorants, and that is that this bird is not tagged or numbered, meaning you don't have to get a license, you can just go out and shoot them as of September 15th. You don't have to dispose of them properly, and you don't have to report how many. That's a very serious crossing of a line in what else we're allowing black bears again, and well, the stories go on from there.
Right, okay, just sort of wrapping up my questions, and then we'll get to the audience questions. Michael, is there something that we can do if we live in an apartment or in a house or even up at the cottage, wherever we have structures, what can we do to help?
Right. Well, outside of just learning how best to treat your windows to protect birds, and we sort of touched on it a little bit, don't hesitate to go to flap.org. There's a whole section dedicated to techniques on how to do this. But you all have a voice. And that's one thing I've learned in the years of doing what I've done. We can't do this without your voice. City government, they're volume-based. If enough people complain, they're going to be inclined to listen. So also on our website, there's a section dedicated to the building code. There's template letters you can sign, send to your local MPP, send to the National Building Code. Everything's there, sort of cut and paste, ready to go. Or just write your own and express your concern and how you feel it's so important that this be taken seriously enough to become part of code. And I can guarantee you, at the rate things are moving based on it being on a regional basis, like just for the province of Ontario, I think there's now 23 different regions that now have made it mandatory for new builds in their communities. But this is far too slow a rate. We need this to happen much more quickly. So please do go to the building code section and learn how you can do this and let your voice be heard. Okay?
Thanks, Mike. Patricia, for the photographers out there, what can we do as photographers to support conservation initiatives across?
Well, I think I think every person can find how they can help with their photography if that's what they wish to do, to tell the story and not just the image. What I think is really important, though, is our behavior as photographers, that we have to have ethical behavior when we're taking images, that we don't get close to nests, that we don't bait. Do not play recordings of birds. That is also baiting. You have a long lens. You don't have to be that close. And to be respectful of that is very, very important because people are watching you. And if you see someone else not doing quite right, well, I often take a picture of them, let them, and again, be that voice for the animals. They need us.
So the welfare of the animal has to come first.
Is absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
If there's any question, it's absolutely paramount. There are many images I have not taken because I walked away, that it wasn't the right thing to do.
Good to hear. Okay, this may be a little tough with the new projector, but does anyone else have a question? And if you do, we've got some program assistants who have some mics that'll come to you, so just, can you pass that down, or?
Okay.
Here comes a mic right now.
You mentioned the EPA, and the United States is currently disassembling itself in the administrative state. And how are you viewing that, and how are you preparing? Does this change FLAP? Does this change how you're going to approach this? I guess as Canadians now, we can just assume that everything in the States is going to go to zero. EPA is going to get shut down. And so going forward, does FLAP have greater requirements now? Are your priorities changing? Are you presaging this dissolution of the United States?
Right. Well, to a degree, this is going to affect Canada, for sure. The good news about the United States is, even though things like federal staff at U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they're being reduced up to 50%. Everyone's afraid for their jobs. There's now over, just in the United States alone, there's over 50 FLAP-like initiatives working on this issue, and they're all preparing for this, and they're not going to back down. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be harder for them. FLAP only has so much control to assist south of the border, but we're working together with these organizations in some shape or form. So it's not going to be easy, but this is not going to bring things to a grinding halt. If we look at our current premier, this is going to be the last thing, always, quite frankly, has been the last thing on his mind. It's going to be even harder to get them to listen. But we have relationships at other levels of government here in Canada, and I'll give you an example. First time, we filed over 50 complaints to Environment Climate Change Canada on buildings that we've been tracking for years that are doing nothing to reduce the bird deaths at their buildings. And they've now started to open investigations on every single one of those buildings. And they start very friendly. We're here to help you, just to let you know you're in violation. This is what you got to do. And it just starts to climb. It escalates as they demonstrate less and less likelihood to do something. They're preparing to put the pressure harder and harder on them. So I'm confident it's not going to move at the pace we want it to, but there's signs that this is still going to be moving forward regardless of the events that are happening in the government. Okay.
Other questions in the back up there?
Yeah, hi. First of all, I'd like to say I think I speak for everyone when I say that I can really feel the raw emotion and passion that you all have for this cause, and I want to thank you both for that. I'd be interested to know if there's any species in particular or groups of species that are overrepresented in these window strikes. I know I'm looking at this photo here, and I think it might be warblers, but yeah, I'd just be interested to know if you guys see that.
Do you want me to speak that, or?
Well, we can both speak to it. I will speak to it differently than Michael. I kind of don't care, meaning that every species is as important to me as any other. I know that we work with things that critically endangered, and it feels it. So, it's all about biodiversity and about every species that matters for me. But the actual number thing, you can answer.
Okay, right. Well, next to flightless birds, like penguins, say, every bird species has the potential to collide, but there are species that we call super colliders. And those tend to be, like you said, warblers, sparrows, the families of species, sparrows, thrush. But then within those, there are really a high number of super colliders, like the white-throated sparrow. Under the sparrow family is up there on the list for us. The ovenbird is up there on the list for the warbler. The hermit thrush up there for the thrush, right? And and again, the volume of these birds that are colliding are those that tend to find themselves moving through tree canopies, or even at ground level along at grade level. It's not the species that tend to be flying high up in the air. And that's why things like standards require up to 16 meters for windows to be treated, because that's where the height of the mature tree canopies tend to be, depending on where you are in the world. So yeah, there are super colliders, and to date we picked up 27 at-risk species. When I started this, most of these at-risk species we pick up today weren't at risk when we started. And every year there's new birds landing on that list. And to just make a point here, bird collisions with buildings is considered the second leading cause of bird death across North America. So this is only going to get worse if we don't get a handle on it. So.
What's the first, Michael?
The first which?
What's the first cause? Let them know.
Oh, cats. Cats. Yep. Yeah, cats is number one. And, there's even overlap there. Like, I'll give an example. A bird hits your window at your home. Many people tend to want to leave the bird alone, give it a chance to gain its composure, and fly away. And like Patricia said earlier, sometimes they fly away and succumb to their injuries. But you'll be amazed at how many times those birds disappear because a cat's come along and taken it off of your porch, right? And so this is where it overlaps. Was this a cat kill or was this a window collision, right? They tend to unfortunately share the same space. So.
Yeah, I think when we used to get the birds brought into the museum, there were a lot of kinglets, and kinglets have an interesting reproductive strategy where they'll lay, tiny little bird, but they'll lay up to 10 eggs in their nest. And so potentially they can produce a lot of young each year. But I also saw a lot of ruby-throated hummingbirds coming in with flap collisions. And ruby-throated hummingbirds are not, as you can imagine, long-lived species. They lay 2 eggs in the breeding season, and hopefully, if they're lucky, produce 2 young. And it's worked fairly well up till now, but I can't help thinking that birds with sort of a low annual reproductive cycle could very quickly get in trouble through it. So something like a hummingbird is something that I worry about a lot, just because they have a short lifespan and they don't produce a lot of young. So there are certain species that are probably more impacted by window collisions than others. Next question. I thought there was a question in the back. Yep, and we'll get.
Is it on? I'm a retired, and my hobby is amateur photography. Is there a way that I can contribute?
Absolutely, there's ways that you can contribute. Don't ever underestimate just sharing it with your friends and family, everything that you learned here today, and how far that goes. You can always volunteer your images to various places, find out about your rescues, find out about FLAP is always looking, I think, for images themselves of living birds, because I have a lot of dead bird images, but I have living ones too, to contribute that as well. Big contribution is, like I said, ethical photography, and letting all those around you know that it matters and that makes a difference. And keep going out there and sharing your images. I think sharing the joy of it is really, really important. And that's why I take a lot of photos. It's because I'm just so happy in the moment. that I'm seeing things. And by sharing that joy, it's the old thing, we save what we care about. And as you can make people care, and photos do that.
Yeah, and I think, there's so many community and citizen science programs out there for birds, that Birds Canada is doing such a wonderful job, that FLAP has. Send those images to them, or get in contact with them, and if you've got some wonderful images, ask if, they could use them, or donate them to those organizations to help them. Because there's a lot of bird photographers now, more than ever, because of digital photography. And I'm not sure what everybody does with their photographs. Like, I know I've got a...
We hide them on hard drives.
Exactly. Why are we doing that? I've been obsessed with loons for the last 5 years. I now have 25,000 loon images, and I've gotten rid of the bad ones. So what I've done is I've joined Canadian Lakes Loon Survey. I've donated my images as much as possible to Birds Canada, just to say, I'd like to see these being used, and whatever we can do to help. And if it's one image or something that may help, the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, for instance, is looking for photographs right now. So sign up and donate images.
Also,
I am naive to the organizations that would require or welcome these images.
Just ask.
So that would be one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing I would ask is, do you have ongoing projects in which you want people to come and help as photographers?
Oh,
because that would be
question.
Attractive to me.
Oh, okay. That's a really good question. Thank you so much for that. One thing I just want to get back for, you can enter contests. That would be a way of sharing them as well. It does cost money to enter, etc. But I did learn that I got to a point where if I had something to say, I needed someone to say it to. And that may be where you're at. It's like I need someone to say it to. I will say people from time to time ask if they can join me. My alarm goes off at 2:30 in the morning. I drive 20 minutes. I get on my bike. I go in the dark with 30 pounds on my back and a tripod attached, and I sit in the dark. So I always say, you think you want to come, and it's really cold at that time. So do reach out to me on Instagram. That's probably where I take mo things, and the same thing, Patricia Homonylo. And I am starting to do bird tours as well, if people would like to come along with those, starting with urban birds and then bigger trips down the line. For that, again, to share that enthusiasm. But if you have something to say, you need someone to say it to. So thank you, everybody, for coming out today. And that's what these images can also do.
Okay, one more question here. I've got this lady in front.
I've got two questions.
No,
short ones. They're both basically yes or no answers. Nighttime collisions, are they more likely to happen when the lights are on or when the lights are off?
Right. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because we are talking about two issues here. There's the bright lights at night being emitted from tall structures, and then there's the windows during the day. The key for the nighttime issue is you reduce lighting. Switch them off. Probably one of the easiest issues to resolve on the planet, quite frankly. Really, how often can you flick a switch and a problem disappears, right? Daytime, as you've already been told, markers on windows, a little bit more complicated, but in of itself, still a relatively easy fix.
Okay. And also, when worlds collide, is it available on streaming?
It is not currently. It will be very shortly. It had to go through the whole film festival thing before I could, but it will be very shortly. Again, Patricia Homonylo photo. You can contact and see information there on it.
Thank you.
Okay, one more then. I promise this will be the last one.
Thank you. You spoke about getting markings on windows as part of the building code for industrial and office applications. Would you like to see such a change on the domestic front as well? And given how much Toronto people value their views, what kind of pushback would you expect?
Right.
It's different to lose your view of the downtown when you're sitting at home than it is to be in an office and have speckles on your window.
All right. very important to point out something about the dotted pattern you saw there. That was designed specifically to address the aesthetic concern and the visual impediment concern. When you put these types of markers up on your window, you might see it at first, but before the day's over, you don't see them anymore. It becomes part of the backdrop, and you start to see beyond those markers, okay? So that's important for everyone to know. Homeowners, as Patricia mentioned earlier, good chunk of the problem, 60% of the problem. I can only say that you really do need to treat your windows if you can. Being in an apartment building, it's a little more tricky because the best solution is on the outside of the glass. But you can put things on the inside of your window as well to help reduce that particular concern. Is that answering your question?
I think something that's interesting about that. Oh.
I'm sorry. It was just, would you like to see it in a building code for?
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you for reminding me of that. That's right. We still have to get the building code to require for new residential developments. They aren't including them in this. Now Toronto is a bit of an exception there because there's really not much urban sprawl happening. It's all going up. It's not going out because they don't have anywhere necessarily to grow, other than when you get out to outlying areas outside of the GTA. But this is where it needs to happen. It needs to happen at single-family dwellings. And the concern is, they believe, like it happened with condos, you put that on my window, on this building I'm trying to sell, people aren't going to buy them. Well, it's not happening. People buy them anyway. They live in them, they see past them, right? So it's a bit of a futile argument. And we got to get the single-family dwelling development side of it on board with that.
I was just going to say, and I also think aesthetically, I go back to the Amy Vitale. It's like now I have the dots, and they only show up once a day, like polka dots on my living room wall, and I really love that, like 20 minutes that happens. I think it's quite beautiful, and that's the aesthetic we have to change as well. When I see a building with dots, I think, oh wow, that's a good-looking building. And it's not an ugly building. It is the more beautiful building, and if we can change that mindset, that also will make a difference. When I see a sheet of glass with nothing on it, my heart sinks. Dots, I'm really happy.
Yeah. Can I add to that, Mark, just one thing on that? Because we were talking about this earlier. What really needs to happen here is an architect, an engineer, a developer, they have to try and find a way to make whatever marker they put on the window that meets the code has its own uniqueness to it. It doesn't have to be dots. It can be anything you want it to be. As long as that spacing and contrast and surface is there, let the marker be unique. Let it become a brand of the building. Let it become an art piece for the building. And we're seeing this happen little by little. We're starting to see some really creative designs going up on buildings, because my personal concern is if everything becomes dots, it becomes a trend. Trends get old, people get rid of trends, and they move on to something else, and they may not replace those markers. So by making it custom and make it look like it's part of the building is really the long-term solution here.
Okay. I think Michael, Patricia, and I will be hanging around for a little bit afterwards, but I do want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank you two especially for your dedication and the effort that you've put in to raise awareness and to come up with solutions, not just create a problem, but come up with solutions. Mm-hmm. And remember, spring migration has started. I know it's only middle of March, but there are birds moving through already. So if you're thinking about treating your windows, now would be a really good time to do it. All right.
And I'm going to come in after that. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you so much, Mark. Especially showing us how moving your hearts and changing your mindsets and improving our laws is really going to save a lot of bird lives. So please join me all in thanking this amazing conversation. And thank all of you for coming out on this very cold day. Wildlife Photographer of the Year 2024 is open now until May 4th, and I hope that this talk has inspired you all to visit it. And we hope you've enjoyed your time with us. So please have a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of your weekend.